bad. Hello.
Hey, Alex.
Hi, Ricky. Good to
How-
connect finally.
Yeah, finally. Yeah, it's not always easy to find schedules that works for everybody when you're dealing with different countries and different locations.
Yeah, especially time zones.
Yeah, and time zones. Where are you located now? Where do you live?
I'm in Monaco. Okay, south. It's like south of France.
Yeah. So you're what, 6 hours ahead, 7 hours ahead?
I'm 6 hours ahead, I think.
Yeah, because it's about 11:52 a.m. here. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that would make it. That would make it 6 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was born in Portugal, and so when we're talking to family back in in Portugal, it's I think same thing, around 5 6 hours ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same time zone.
Yep. Awesome.
Central European time.
Yep. Well, thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. You're one of
Hey,
the.
it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love having people on that focus on stories that really need more attention and aren't getting the attention it's needed. I mean, even some of the websites and podcasts and radio shows I listen to that I trust and respect, a lot of them don't talk about this specific story, and it's something that you're expert in, and you've obviously focused a lot of your time researching and looking into. And I actually I think I initially heard about you on Fault Lines, which is
Okay.
a great morning show that I listen to from time to time, and it really kind of sparked my interest. And I knew a little bit too about the documentary, the Magnitsky Act, behind the scenes, and I was just, to me, it was like, I was just so outraged by the censorship of your book, the censorship of the documentary. It seemed like, wow, people really don't want the story to get out there. They really don't want people to know what's really going on, and the censorship, and really who are these characters, and what's really going on behind the scenes. And I'm glad I have you on to kind of get into all this, because I think some of these names and some of these things are words that people are somewhat familiar with. I think some people are familiar with the Magnitsky Act. They probably have heard it. They probably know a little bit about it. They might know a little bit about Bill Browder, because he's obviously done a lot of interviews on. He's even been on some podcasts like London Real. He's been on CNN. He's been all over the place. But people are getting one side of the story, and now more than ever, you're seeing this crazy censorship on YouTube and Google and Twitter and Facebook and all this stuff. And it's just like, before when the internet was really getting big, I mean, one thing I loved about the internet is that I can do my own research, and if I just put in the right words, and I'm looking for specific topics, or looking into backgrounds of specific people, whatever I'm looking up, the most relevant thing will just come up. And now that's not the case. If you're looking to do research online, a lot of the stuff you really have to go through, pages and pages, or go through weird website to try to get any real information, because they're force feeding you the mainstream media narrative first. And those are websites you're getting first. And so I guess to start from the beginning, because like I said, I think there's probably going to be a lot of people who listen to this podcast that might be familiar with some of this, but don't really know much about it, and would love kind of an overview. How did you get in? Let's get a little bit of your background. How did you get involved in this? What made you intrigued with the story, and made you, I guess, motivated to want to write this book and look into this case?
Well, there's it's like a confluence of things that happened in my life. For one thing, first of all, the way I even came across this whole thing is through my work, and I'm in hedge funds. And so in November of 2005, I got invited to Bill Browder's presentation, which was organized here in Monaco. And I had no idea who Bill Browder was, what he did. I knew that, the invitation was to some dude who ran a hedge fund in Russia. And I basically had no interest in the subject, but I wasn't going to go, but that particular day, I think I had nothing better to do, so I went anyway. And so there was Bill Browder doing his presentation about his investing in Russia. And the presentation was surprisingly well delivered, very interesting, fascinating. Bill Browder came across really well, like smart guy, he knew his shit. And are we allowed to say shit on your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, we get swear. Yeah, my podcast, we're very casual. I try to capture as close to a real conversation as possible, and then, as you know, in real conversations, people swear sometimes. So
yeah, okay, great, brilliant. Then I don't have to censor myself as much.
No, not at all.
Okay, so I thought that was all very, very, very interesting, and I trade commodities, and I don't really have a whole lot of interest in investing in Russian stocks and stuff like that. But one thing that did get my attention is that Bill Browder was speaking very positively about Vladimir Putin, okay? And this was the first time ever I heard anybody say nice things about Vladimir Putin. And they were not, they were not incidental nice things. They were very relevant things. And Browder clearly had, a good vantage point. And, in the sense, here's what he was saying. He was saying about corruption in Russia and how his investment strategy was basically to buy large shares in these very, very corrupt Russian companies, and then to analyze, research, and reveal the corruption, to show the names of people who were stealing the money, and then feed that information to Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Russian newspapers. And in pretty much every important case, Vladimir Putin's government would step in and they would take care of it. They would fire the corrupt officials. They would reorganize the companies. They would change the laws that, the loopholes that enable this kind of corrupt behavior. And so this surprised me because my assumption being, at the time, I had no suspicion that what the information we were being fed about Russia was distorted and biased. And so I thought, that's really interesting, because I assumed all along that Vladimir Putin was just simply a figurehead president who was brought to power by the oligarchs in order to protect the oligarchs and their business interests. And so what Browder was saying is that's not what it was. The Vladimir Putin was actively, in meaningful ways, in the corruption of the oligarchs. So that spiked my interest in the whole thing. But, then the thing went away. Browder's story carried on, but I wasn't paying so much attention to it anymore. I was vaguely aware that he got thrown out of Russia, literally, I think, within a week from making that presentation in Monaco. And his story appeared in the press from time to time, but I didn't really pay much attention. And then 5 years later, in 2010, there was again some lunch event at which Bill Browder was speaking. So I was invited, I went, and this time Bill Browder completely changed his story on Russia, 180 degrees. So one thing he said when I first heard him speak in 2005, before he was thrown out of Russia, he said that everybody in the world should own stock shares of companies like Gazprom. And 5 years later, he was saying, stay away from Russia. Nobody should invest a penny in any kind of business in Russia. And so I thought, okay, that's interesting, whatever. And he spent the bulk of time at this 2010 event talking about what had happened to Sergei Magnitsky, his quote unquote lawyer, who died or got killed in a Russian prison during the investigations of Bill Browder's, as it turned out, of Bill Browder's tax fraud. And well, as far as that went, those were interesting but not terribly consequent stories from my point of view. But over the years, then I paid a little bit more attention to events in Russia and around Russia. You know, in 2006 there was that Georgia war, and then there were events in Ukraine, in Syria, and so forth. And I looked at that as let's say, as an observer of global political, geopolitical, economic events. And I started to realize that there's kind of a pretty heavy-handed, unfair bias in the way that Russia and its leadership were being presented in the Western media. And then the last thing that happened, which finally prompted me to write my book, was that I received a copy of Bill Browder's Red Notice, his bestseller thing, which essentially carries the narrative which has ultimately led in 2012 to the passage of the Magnitsky Act. And so after I read the book, and by this time, keep in mind, this is 2015, by this time I'm still thinking Bill Browder is a swell guy, you know, he's a really smart guy, a hedge fund manager, probably not Snow White clean, but, you know, generally a positive character. But after I read his book, you know, things just didn't gel, and I thought, that's weird, you know, like this is the way he exposes his narrative is not the way I understood the things to be, and some of those things by this time I knew pretty well about, and that kind of prompted me to read his book the second time. And when I read it the second time, I noticed a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of stories that just don't pass any kind of a smell test at all. And I also realized that the story is too big for it to be just a story of one ex-hedge fund manager. Because even though Bill Browder's hedge fund at its peak was, I think, at about $4.6 billion, that sounds like a lot of money. But in a hedge fund world, it's not really that big. You know, there's hedge funds with tens and twenties and hundreds and trillions under management. So Bill Browder isn't a huge figure in this industry. And so upon my second reading of the book, I realized that the importance of that story goes far beyond his role, his problems, and his experiences in Russia, and that there must have been a larger, much more powerful network that he was fronting for. And I think that I initially intended to write a book review on Amazon of his book to say, hey, you know, like this story is really suspicious. But I saw that he had something like, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 five-star reviews on Amazon. And so, you know, what difference does one review that just says the story is suspect, what difference does it make? And so I started I thought somebody needs to write a book to expose this fraud, because it's a very dangerous fraud. It's not just whether Bill Browder wins wins his case over tax fraud, if he convicts a few supposedly corrupt Russian policemen of tax fraud against their own nation, that the import of the whole thing is a deliberate and concerted escalation towards wider conflict against Russia, between West and Russia. So United States, NATO, and major Western countries versus Russia. And that, like that's practically an unthinkable scenario, because the weapons of mass destruction nowadays are such that we could wipe out humanity in a very short time.
Absolutely.
And so
yeah. Continue.
I thought, well, maybe it's not going to be anybody if it isn't going to be me. Maybe because it's kind of, at the time it was still a rather obscure story. No, other than Lucy Commissar and Andrei Nekrasov and a few people like Robert Perry, not very many people were writing about this. And as you pointed out, there's like this real resistance to letting the other side of the story seep into the public discourse. And so I sat down and I started writing this book, and my beginning premise was just to use his book and things that he himself says in the book to debunk his narrative, because the book itself is so full of flaw. I mean, these unbelievable twists and turns and facts that just don't stand up to any kind of scrutiny.
What was his narrative in the book?
Well, basically, the narrative goes like this. So he was running a large hedge fund in Russia. Then he got thrown out in 2005. And then the Russian secret police stole his companies. So the companies that he owned in Russia got stolen by this network of corrupt policemen, and they used his companies, loaded them up with fraudulent liabilities, and these liabilities matched entirely his 2006 profits, which were close to $1 billion. Okay, he paid $230 million in taxes against this profit he generated in 2006. And by loading up his companies with $1 billion worth of fraudulent liabilities, they were able to show the Russian government that in fact these profits never took place, that they didn't really make the profits, to claim tax reimbursement. So $230 million of taxes that his companies paid to the Russian treasuries should have actually been zero. So they applied for a reimbursement of the $230 million. And this reimbursement was paid. And I think this was around Christmas time, 2007. And so what he's saying is that the corrupt police officers in Russia defrauded the Russian government of these $230 million. Now, Sergei Magnitsky, his role supposedly was that he investigated the situation, and that he found out that there was this tax fraud by a corrupt policeman, and he blew the whistle. And because he blew the whistle, he ended up imprisoned. And to cover up this theft of $230 million, he was tortured and killed in prison in Russia. And so his narrative was that he was a victim of a tax fraud by corrupt Russian authorities, that his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, discovered this and blew the whistle, and that he was killed in order for these corrupt Russian authorities to cover up. All right. That's his narrative. unfortunately, this narrative completely doesn't hold up to any kind of scrutiny. Even like a rudimentary due diligence review would have uncovered all kinds of inconsistencies in his story and in the allegations he makes. And many of the allegations he makes, he has absolutely no evidence for. He goes around claiming that he has evidence of this and that, but when he was in his 2015 deposition, when he was subpoenaed to present the key documents that supported his narrative, he basically said that Dog ate his homework.
So, when you were reading his book, how much did you know about the topic? How did you know that some of it was inconsistent? Was it just basically your knowledge of going to, meeting him and seeing his complete 180 opinion on Russia and his opinion on all that? Is that what made you skeptical, or were there things that you knew just from reading the book that just didn't make sense, that didn't line up? How did you know initially that there was that he was bullshitting, that there was more to this, that there's more to this story than meets the eye?
Well, I think that having seen him change his story 180 degrees and become from a big Vladimir Putin cheerleader to his number one enemy, as he himself states, only made me kind of suspicious from the get-go, okay? But suspicious without anything specific, I just thought, okay, so he's spinning yarn here, but I'm not sure exactly how and what. Then when I read his book, I think the one thing that struck me is how completely negative he was towards all things Russian. It was like an unnuanced negativity, which is constantly contrast with an unnuanced positivity about the world in the West. So like Russia is this dark place where there's no freedom for the people of any sort. There's no freedom of speech. There's no individual human rights, and then in the West everything is hunky-dory and wonderful. Well, I knew that neither part of that narrative was exactly right. Like Russia is not this dark place where there's no human rights. It's not perfect, but it's not anything like what he was representing.
Yeah, it wasn't black
and in
or
the
white.
West, we know it's not this, like wonderful place where you're left alone to do your thing so long as you don't break the law. It's not like that at all. And so I started combing through his book, and I found, I think I found between 30 and 40 things that completely that left me completely convinced that he was lying and distorting and exaggerating and so forth. And if a person is doing that means that he's hiding something. Okay, so I thought, what is he hiding? And like I had my suspicions, but they were mostly suspicions you could speculate about because you don't know exactly. And then I started researching certain specific issues related to this whole thing. And one of the things that I was already looking into before I even read his book was the Russian transition from quote unquote communism to quote unquote capitalism. Okay. And this whole process was also nothing like we were told at the time or even up to this day in the mainstream media. This, as I learned, was an unscrupulous pirate raid to despoil Russia of her wealth. It was a very, very successful pirate raid. And it resulted in the longest depression recorded in the 20th century and one of the worst humanitarian disasters that ever happened in the 20th century. And that includes the wars, because Russia lost between 5 and 6 million people through this transition period. this is based on normal peacetime demographic trends. And then through the transition years in the 1990s, Russia loses between 5 and 6 million people to hunger, malnutrition, disease, suicide, alcoholism, and so forth. So things got really, really bad and really, really ugly. And Bill Browder was a part of this. Okay. So trying to put the whole episode in context of what was going on. And another reason why this was very interesting to me is that I grew up in former Yugoslavia and Croatia, which made part of former Yugoslavia up until 1991. And we also had this transition from a socialist economy to a capitalist economy. And, in our case, even though it was essentially the same process, it wasn't anything as horrible and destructive as what Russia went through. And so through Bill Browder's story, I try to connect where he belonged, how he got into that position. And it's obvious that the story that he tells about how he got into this position is also very exaggerated fishing expedition story. He just puts himself. If you take his story at face value, you'd have to conclude that he's this genius super entrepreneur who just all of his own went into a situation he knew nothing about, figured it out, got the capital together from people who otherwise wouldn't even look at him, being Safra, and gave him seed capital to start this business venture of investing in Russia. Well, having been in the hedge fund industry for the last 10, 15 years, I know that things don't quite happen that way. And so I thought either he's lying or things happen as he says they did, but it wasn't him. He had helpers, he had backers. He was part of a network that put him in front as their agent in Russia. But this wasn't just him being this larger than life super entrepreneur who just did all this by himself.
Was there any potential that he could be just sour towards Russia or negative towards Russia because he felt like he did get screwed by the police and that whole situation? Was there any thoughts that maybe you thought that was his motivation? Like, okay, maybe he just had a complete 180 turnaround in opinion of Russia because he felt like he got screwed.
Well, I think that while he was in Russia, it was in his best interest to be kissing up to the ruling establishment. That's clear. Once he was kicked out, he no longer had any reason to kiss up to the ruling establishment so there he lost one incentive. The question you ask is a good one. I think it enters into his psychology, which I'm gonna speculate. So take it with a pinch of salt. But what happened to him? When you're running a big successful business and you have plans for the future and you're making gobs of money, and you feel like you're the super businessman, you feel good, and then from one day to another you get the rug pulled from under you. So from that point of view, yes, I'm sure that he suddenly felt very bitter about what had happened. But the whole thing is his own fault because he was he was supposed to pay taxes in Russia, okay? And while he did pay some taxes, he also, together with Sergei Magnitsky, who was his accountant, not his lawyer, okay? He was an accountant. They used this tax scheme that allowed them to, I'm speaking off the top of my head, but instead of paying 30 or 35% taxes on their capital gains, on the investments that they made, they were paying something like 5%. Okay, and to be eligible for this advantageous tax rate that was possible to have in Russia, they needed to satisfy certain conditions, and they didn't satisfy those conditions. And so the tax authority, this was in a region called Kalmykia, where they had registered companies to take advantage of these advantageous tax rates. The authorities there said, like, well, no, you're not entitled to this tax rate because you're not satisfying the conditions. So you have to pay us the full amount of taxes, which is 35%, I think the figure was. And instead of paying the taxes, Bill Browder bankrupted the companies that he had registered in Kalmykia and said, like, well, too bad, I can't pay. Are we online?
Yeah. Sorry, no, I was just
Okay,
I didn't want to cut in. I thought you were going to continue. You had more to add to that.
No, I just got a Skype message, poor connection. So I thought maybe you didn't.
No, I'm here. Yeah. Sometimes.
So
yeah, continue. Yep.
Yeah, so basically there were these 2003 there was this 2003 tax case where the Kalmykian authorities were investigating Bill Browder for avoidance of tax. And so these investigations carried on, and then eventually they were passed to the federal level. So he was investigated by Moscow authorities for the payment of these taxes in Kalmykia, right? And so this is the case that eventually led to him being thrown out of Russia and to his companies getting raided in 2007 because they were not cooperating with the investigation. So eventually, the police, he described it himself. The police called him. They said, like, we want to come in. We want to ask you a few questions, show you a few documents. And Bill Browder ignored them, didn't cooperate. And then sometimes later, they raided his office, and they raided the office of Firestone Duncan, which was the law firm that he employed in Russia. And his accountant, Sergei Magnitsky, was the employee of Firestone Duncan. So that's where these tax schemes were organized, but they were not done properly. And so this is the origin of his problems in Russia, which led to his expulsion, to his visa being rescinded, and to his companies getting raided, and all the documents being taken away by the police.
So Magnitsky, Sergei
Magnitsky.
Yeah, he gets eventually arrested, right? And
yes.
And Browder assumes that he gets murdered because of this whole tax scenario and scandal that you were referring to. Is that Browder's story?
Yeah, well, I don't know that Browder assumed that Sergei Magnitsky was murdered, but that's what he represents. That's part of his narrative. Now, the fact is that Sergei Magnitsky had some serious health problems while he was in prison, and his health situation should have been attended to by the prison authorities. Okay, and the fact that they failed does make them responsible for his death. There's no question about that. There are some suspicions, however, because as it turns out, Bill Browder and the network that he's involved with, that he works for, do have people in Russia. They do have a certain ability to do things in Russia. So there's a suspicion that they might have been able to poison him. Okay. And that his health problems had to do with the poisoning. I don't know. We're speculating. Russians have conducted several investigations into the death of Sergei Magnitsky, and I think that ultimately they named Bill Browder as a suspect in this murder case. So Bill Browder is obviously saying the Russians done it. But the Russians are saying, well, maybe Bill Browder done it. And I have to say that had Magnitsky died of something like, if he were killed with a knife or with a bullet, or if there was evident signs of poisoning, I would suspect that Bill Browder or whoever he's involved with actually did murder Magnitsky. I would strongly suspect that. As it is, I don't think it's so clear. At any rate, it was a massive cock-up by the Russian authorities because Sergei Magnitsky was their most important witness against Browder. Okay, so if they wanted to investigate Bill Browder's business and understand how he moved his money around, Sergei Magnitsky would have been the man to have as their witness and as a person to question. The fact that they let him die made things a lot worse, and at the same time it enabled Bill Browder to claim that they murdered him and that his murder was the reason for his murder was a cover-up. So that kind of makes his story a little bit more credible, a bit more easy to believe, and it makes the Russian case a bit more difficult. Well, but who killed him and why is very difficult to discern. In any case, it was a big negative for the Russians, and it was a big positive for Browder himself.
Yeah, so it could be a cover-up, but I guess we're not sure who's covering up what, right? Because it could either be Browder could be linked to it because he would have incentive in taking him out because he, like you said, he is a witness. He knows what was going on. He knew, if they could get him to talk, he could expose some of Browder's scandal, tax scandal. Or it could be the other way around where, Browder's could be some truth to Browder's story where, maybe he was a whistleblower and they were trying to. So I guess there's
no. It's certain that he wasn't a whistleblower. That we know for sure.
So
and it is almost certain that it wasn't the Russians who stole the $230 million.
Okay.
Because there was another company in Russia who did the same thing. Stole companies, loaded them up with bogus liabilities, and then claimed a tax credit, a reimbursement of taxes. And this was Renaissance Capital. And Renaissance Capital was also an investment firm in Russia. I think they still exist, actually. And as it turned out, the people who orchestrated this tax fraud, both in the case of Hermitage Capital, the Browder's firm, and in the case of Renaissance Capital, they were some of the same people. Yeah. And so this was a way to this was simply a highly technical way of stealing money from the Russian treasury, which has been done not just by Browder's firms, not just through Browder's firms, but also through Renaissance Capital firms. The difference is the Renaissance Capital kept it quiet and let it blow over, while Bill Browder used the story to confuse the whole issue, to mix up this tax fraud with the issue of tax avoidance investigations that were in place against him and his firms, which were two completely different issues, and to claim that this was a crime by Russian authorities, that Sergei Magnitsky uncovered it and blew the whistle. None of that is true. That for sure is not true. That has been proven through documents. The way Bill Browder was able to make this claim is because he and his team mistranslated the records of Sergei Magnitsky's questioning at the police. So they mistranslated these documents to make it seem like Sergei Magnitsky went there to blow the whistle, whereas the the real original Russian documents, independently translated, show that he was there for questioning, that it was the police already conducting an investigation against Bill Browder and his company, and they had him come in for questioning. So, there he confuses the issue where he says like he was blowing. He wasn't blowing the whistle. He was there being questioned by the police.
So it seems like there's hunches that whoever is behind Bill, did I lose you? Oh, I might have lost you. Are you?
Yeah. Hello.
Are you still there, Alex?
So,
Yeah.
at what point did we lose connection?
Just briefly a second. I don't think I was listening the whole time actually. So I got the end of your statement in regards to he definitely wasn't a whistleblower and all that, and then I was just gonna follow up with asking, because it sounds like, and it seems like it, and you can tell by just how censored your book has been and anything else that really is shedding light on this other side of the story. It seems like there's bigger players behind Bill Browder, that it isn't just an investor or a business owner who's just trying to do the right thing and then, just feels like, because I mean, he's gone on this, I mean, his whole life, his whole reason for existence has been to demonize Russia. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which seems really weird for somebody who basically was just a businessman trying to make maximum profit all the time. How does he go from being this, a business person who, like you said, probably isn't, completely morally the greatest person in the world, to all of a sudden, his heart's in the right place and he has this life journey and passion to try to do what's right and all this nonsense. Like, who do you think, and of course this is probably a little bit of also speculation, but in your opinion, with all the research you've done and all the reading and stuff, you being involved in this case, what's your opinion on who do you think is behind him? Is there somebody backing him? Is there a government? Is there an organization? Is there people? Is there business interests? Like, who do you think is pushing this, either funding Bill Browder to do all this or working with him to push this agenda?
Yeah, I think again, I'm going to have to speculate because we're never going to know exactly the people by name and by affiliation. But one thing that is very clear, and this is clear from analyzing historical patterns of events, okay? Basically, today, we have a continuation of conflict that goes back perhaps as far as 200 years, maybe more. You have an empire which is, even though today on the surface of things, it appears that it's an American empire, it isn't really an American empire. This is the vestiges of the British Empire, which over the past few centuries, up until today, are endeavoring to subjugate the whole world. Okay, so now this may sound, if you aren't paying attention, this may sound like a completely wacky conspiracy theory. But today we know a lot more than we did, or at least I do, that we did decades ago about how World War I happened, how World War II happened, and about what happened in the United States between in the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century when the Federal Reserve was established. And we've seen that the British interests have pretty much infiltrated and co-opted all the key functions of the American government. So defense, Treasury, Department of Justice, FBI, CIA, and so forth. And the logic of empire, and this is not unique to the British Empire, but the logic of empire is that you have to eliminate any other power that could conceivably be your rival. Okay, and so from the point of view of the British Empire, the key rivals have been in the last century Germany and Russia. Today it's Russia and China. And so you have this constant pouring of gasoline onto the smoldering fires of conflict between the West and Russia and the West and China. And their ultimate objective is to weaken these rivals, either through war or through economic war of attrition, and to subjugate them, to make them weak, to be able to dictate policy to them, and to ultimately infiltrate them, and to bring about change in power, where the people you put in power are then loyal to you, and that they do your bidding. All right, and so the center of this power, let's say the apex, the top of the pyramid, is the money cartel, is the international finance cartel, which is probably a small group of families that run the world's largest banking establishments, and that control all the largest central banks of the world. And for them, the thing that would be interesting is to turn Russia into a source of cheap resources, and to turn Russian population into a source of cheap labor force. Same as has been done in many other countries, India, Congo, China, Angola. Everywhere that the West has colonized, this is exactly what's been done. The population is turned into essentially a slave force, and the countries are despoiled of their resources. Germany was very powerful. It took 2 world wars to destroy it. Russia is very powerful, and even 70 years of communism hasn't destroyed it, and they still managed to bounce back. And in the last 20 or 30 years, China has bounced back. And so the purpose that Bill Browder's campaign serves is the purpose of this empire. And the way Bill Browder's campaign serves the empire is by, so this Magnitsky legislation that is being passed in country after country, it was first United States in 2012, then it was Canada, then it was Council of Europe, and so forth, and they're being pushed on more and more countries, all under the guise of human rights, because you know how we care about human rights in the West. The objective is to throw up barriers of cooperation between Russia and the West, so that Russians cannot go to the Western jurisdictions and sort out their grievances through Western courts. Okay, so we talked in the beginning about Russian transition in the 1990s from communism to capitalism. Through that transition, through that process, Western financial interests have stolen between $200 and $600 billion of Russia's wealth. And I think that the real figure could be 600 or more. Let's say that these are estimates based on what was known from the real transfers. So some of Russia's most valuable resources and companies and systems have ended up in Western ownership under very suspicious conditions, and probably illegally, or if it wasn't illegally, it was done in the legal framework that was established by the Yeltsin government, and the Yeltsin government was completely pliant to the Western dictate, and they essentially by decree passed whatever law Western powers required. And so all this wealth was stolen. And now with the Putin government, they want to trace the wealth back and they want to recover it. And because the wealth was taken, through a whole chain of foreign offshore shell companies, the Russians need to investigate this through Western jurisdictions. So they need cooperation from Cyprus, in Cyprus, in London, in the United States, in Canada, and wherever this money was going through. And in order to do this, they need to be able to, hire legal teams and conduct their investigations. Well, when you pass this Magnitsky legislation, then you can just, without any legal due process, you can put names of Russian individuals on the list of sanctioned people and companies and organizations, whatever it be, and then they cannot do what they intend to do. So you've raised the barrier to cooperation between Russian authorities and the Western authorities. Okay. So this is my interpretation is that the Magnitsky legislation is part of a large cover-up to ensure that Russians can never get to the bottom of who stole exactly how much from them, and in order to be able to sue for recovery of those assets. And I think that the enormity of interests that are at stake makes it so that for these people that probably have Browder in their employment, they would rather throw us all into an all-out war against Russia than allow for these investigations to run their course.
So, and I think one thing that you talk about that is so important is just the American empire, and historically how you can kind of trace this back all the way to World War I, World War II, how empires, their one goal is to stay an empire, and I think a lot of times people don't realize history is happening when it's happening. And
yeah.
And right now it's people have a hard time believing that we're any different, or that we're similar to some of the empires of the past. We in America, we've been sold this idea that we're these freedom fighters and we're going around helping people, and you look at empires in history, and empires go around conquering people, not helping people. And I'm sure even you go back in historical times, people who were going around conquering, they also justified their conquering by saying that they were doing it to help, to help people, or for I guess personal interests that are important. And you see that in the U.S. where it's just, you talk to people in America, and it's amazing how uninformed they are historically, how little they know about our past. And like you said, we're kind of just we really are just the Western powers all over again. We're the Brits, we're the French, we're the fall of the Ottoman Empire, when we carved up the Middle East and created countries, and those what was it, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and all these things that create constant, just I guess, justification to get involved. And a lot of people aren't even familiar with World War I and some of the nuances of World War II. It's not really sexy things to talk about in America. You go in history class in America, you learn about the Civil War, and you learn about these generals and these great battles and all this stuff. But all the real interesting stuff that really helps you understand some of the conflicts of present day, those aren't really discussed. Those aren't talked about. And it almost seems like when you talk to people from other countries, they have a much better understanding of American history and Western history than Westerners themselves. I mean, do you kind of agree with that?
Well, yes and no. Like I didn't everything I told you now I didn't learn in school. I mean, what I learned in school was essentially, similar kind of feel good narratives that I think that by and large everybody in the West is being fed. Um, One thing that I was very surprised to learn, and I learned this through my research for this book, is that Russia had a major role in the U.S. Civil War. Okay, and like I went to school in the United States. I was an exchange student, and I went to a high school near in Simi Valley near Los Angeles. And so I took American history and American politics and all this. And one of the major chunks of U.S. history is the Civil War. And so I walked away from that education with the impression that Civil War was about the abolition of slavery, right? The nice people in the North wanted to free the slaves, and the nasty people in the South wanted to keep the slave, and then they all went to war to set the slaves free, and then, like happy ending, slavery was abolished. That's how I understood it. And I never, ever, ever heard anybody tell me or read anywhere that Russia had any role in this whole episode. And this is what really happened. Slavery was a secondary issue. The issue was again the logic of empire. The United States, in the first 50 years of the 19th century, experienced the fastest, largest ever recorded growth of wealth and prosperity. It was an enormous success story, and for the British Empire, this became a worry because now they had a rival with with the fleet on the Pacific Ocean and on the Atlantic Ocean, and to make sure that the United States couldn't become a rival and an impediment to their dominance of all the trade routes in the world, they crafted a plan to divide the United States into two smaller, weaker entities, which would then become the clients of the British Empire. So they pitted the South against the North, and what the South wanted was not to keep the slaves. The South wanted to secede. And what the North wanted, not to free the slaves, but to keep the Union intact. And so the French and the British planned to divide the United States into two smaller, weaker entities. And so they've done everything to encourage the South to secede, and they've done everything to disable the North and Abraham Lincoln administration to keep the Union intact. And they were almost successful at it, except that at the last hour, the Russian Tsar Alexander II sent his navy to the ports of New York and San Francisco, where they anchored and stayed for 6 months, which then completely disabled the British agenda. Okay, and I lived in the United States for about 3.5 years of my life. I have there many friends, and many of them are university educated people, some of them with master's and PhD degrees. And I kind of informally did this survey of asking them, like, so, hey, what was the Civil War about? And to the last one of them, they said abolition of slavery. And then I asked them, did Russia have any role in the U.S. Civil War? And none of them knew that Russia did have a role in the U.S. Civil War. So that tells you that at some level, this failure to understand history is not an accident of our education. That it is the curriculum is deliberately being crafted in a way that we don't understand the context. So, like, we get the events, there was this battle and there was that battle and this general and that general won and this one lost, and then there was, this convention and this treaty and la la la. You get a lot of facts, and you're supposed to memorize all those facts, but nobody tells you the context. How do all these facts fit into a larger agenda, and what might this larger agenda be? Because if people understood this larger agenda, then they would realize, my God, but this is exactly the same shit that is going on today.
Yeah, I mean,
this is why the world is a mess. Somebody's doing all this, and it's not difficult to discern why they're doing all this. Obviously, it's question of economic and political power and dominance over all our lives.
Yeah, that Civil War or perspective is so important, because you look at it, I mean, it basically was a proxy war between the Russians and the Brits, which were enemies then and kind of continue, I mean, throughout history. When you look at like North Korea, or the Korean War, I should say, one, the Soviets funding one side, and then the English helping the other side, or the U.S. helping the other side. Like, it's just, you see this proxy war type thing continuously happen. And it's funny because even the Civil War is one of those things nobody ever talks about, the fact that the Russians and the Brits were enemies even back then. They weren't friendly, and they both had incentive in helping the other side and whatnot. And like you said, in America, it's so easy to, and I'm sure in many countries, it's so easy just to revise history by just completely leaving some specifics out and just regurgitating information over and over again. And then people never question if it's factual, if it's historically correct. And I see that over and over again. I've had Gerard Williams on, who some years ago, who wrote the book Grey Wolf: The Escape of Adolf Hitler. And I remember the first time I heard that theory of him making it to Argentina, I'm like, no, that sounds crazy. I'm like, there's no way that could be. How do I not know of this? And then when you look into his book and his research and the lack of evidence that he actually died in Germany, you're just like, holy crap! Like, there's like literally no evidence that he actually died in Germany, but yet we just keep saying this. And you see that over and over again in history, where things are just told over and over. I had Manuel Rosa, a Portuguese author and historian, who writes about Columbus and Christopher Columbus and his possible real identity and who he was, and his real story. And it's fascinating to hear these other perspectives, because it's amazing how when one historical event or story is told the same way over and over again, we just assume somebody has done the research, somebody has fact checked this, that somebody has gone through some real investigation on if the story is true before it's told over and over and over again, and it just becomes accepted. And in many cases, you realize that's not what happens.
Yeah, in many cases, you realize that's not what happened. And I think that, one very positive thing about the time that we live in today is that a lot of that knowledge has become available. It's not necessarily easy to find, but it's available. And, it's not just crazy, stupid conspiracy theories. There were people who have combed through declassified CIA files to declassified State Department documents. And I don't know if you know Anthony Sutton, but Anthony Sutton, he was a history professor in Berkeley, and he wrote 3 books about one about the Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, one about the rise of Hitler and Wall Street, and one about the Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And his materials are completely sourced out of official documents. So he doesn't delve in conspiracy theories. He just lays out what he researched in real state documents and gives you the perspective that you never knew. You never knew that the Russian Bolshevik Revolution was orchestrated by the West pretty much in the same way as the 2014 coup in Ukraine was orchestrated by the West. Pretty much the same deal. and that the Bolsheviks were actually very closely cooperating with Western financial interests, and also that Western financial interest directly financed the rise of Hitler.
Yeah.
And so all these things now are known if you care to know them. But I think that we all have to care to know them, because if we know them, then again we're being, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here.
No, then in the end, we're being led blind to slaughter again, on false premises, on fraudulent narratives, and on these obscure agendas that we're never told about. Like we're told about freedom and democracy and fighting evil and so forth, which, it tells you something. It tells you something. And the thing that it tells you is that people are decent. In the United States, as in Russia, as in everywhere else, people are decent. So if you told them the truth of why you're going to war, they wouldn't fight, they wouldn't go, they wouldn't agree. So we have to be lied to be coerced to war, and to, how do you call it, to consent that our money finances bombing some other country. They have to lie to us. But in the same way that they say, like the truth will set you free, by being lied to and swallowing the lies, we are actually helping enslave ourselves. And it's gotten so bad that we now live in a state of permanent war, something that we thought was a dystopian fantasy by George Orwell, but we're actually living it today. And so I think that we all have the responsibility to find the truth, to try to understand what's going on, and to not cooperate in things that offend a normal person's conscience.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we live. I guess we live in a great time in regards to be able to find the truth or search for the truth if you're willing to put a little bit of effort into it and not just swallow the propaganda or nonsense that is told to you by mainstream media or the government or whatever it may be. But it's also gotten harder because the truth, it seems, when the internet first got popular, it seemed like it was a great place to find alternative views and whatnot. And now it's gone to the point where it's a lot. Your book got censored. The Magnitsky Act documentary got censored. These things get censored. So you can't. I had filmmakers on my show who did this documentary called The Big Secret, and before I had them on, or just recently when I had them on, we were talking about how Amazon hasn't censored their documentary, but Netflix has censored some documentaries, and Amazon end up censoring their documentaries soon after they're on my show, and it was about just the history of medicine and how the influence that big pharma has, right. and anytime you mess around with big pharma, it's a very delicate topic, and and then Vaxxed, another documentary. I had Del Bigtree, who's a filmmaker who did the documentary Vaxxed, that he had an agreement with Amazon where that was going to be free on Amazon Prime forever, and they just pulled that. Dr. Brzezinski, who's a doctor I had on my podcast probably like 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, you did? Oh, great.
Yeah.
I know about him.
Yeah. I had him on years ago, and his documentary was on Amazon for a long time, and now you can't even purchase it on Amazon. I believe it was completely.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. So
I saw the documentary about his whole thing.
Yeah,
years ago. That was very fascinating.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Well, it's one of those documentaries that really pull your heartstrings because there's people who are alive who shouldn't even be alive, and this guy is. I mean, regardless if there's, and I remember when I had him on, my co-host, he was like, "Oh, he's like, oh, I don't know. He's like, I don't. There's a lot of people who say it's bullshit, this and that. And I'm like, listen. And his name's Dave, my co-host. I'm like, Dave. I'm like, I'm glad you're going into this podcast skeptical because I want you to ask some tough questions and get him to maybe explain himself. And
Yeah.
after the show, he, my co-host was just as outraged as I was at this guy who was just basically found this thing called anti-neoplastones, which had some positive effects in curing people of cancer. Didn't have at least the freedom or ability to at least have this as a option for some people. Like people should have that choice. And we don't have the choice
Yeah.
of information. We don't have the choice. I mean, even the vaccine debate is very interesting to me because same thing where it's people are getting one side of the story. It's similar to your book. I mean, most people are getting one side of the story, and I think people are
Right.
they're intelligent enough where if they get all, you can only have a informed opinion, an intelligent opinion on a topic if you get all the information. You can't have an informed opinion if you don't have all the information to have informed opinion. So people are getting one side. So if you control the information, you control the opinion, and that's how and they understand that. Industries understand
Yeah.
that. Big pharma understands that. The government understands that. So you can
Exactly.
you can push a narrative by just controlling the information they're exposed to, and that's exactly what they're doing. Instead of saying, here's all the information, you guys aren't dumb, you're not, you're adults, you have the right to get all the information and then come up with your own conclusion. And that's the way things should be. And unfortunately, somebody like Dr. Brzezinski, who the FDA ends up bringing, if people aren't familiar with his documentaries, hopefully you could still find it free on YouTube. And I know people are constantly, reposting them or whatnot. And look for it, purchase it, watch it. It's a guy who was considered a medical genius until he found something that could possibly treat cancer. Then all of a sudden he's a pseudoscience, crazy person. And the fact that
Yeah, kind of like Andrew Wakefield, same thing.
yeah, it's a very similar. But the crazy thing about Dr. Brzezinski is that he didn't do anything illegal, and his treatment has a higher success rate than chemo and radiation. And the way I look at it is like, we know that radiation causes cancer. There's a reason why they tell you not to go near Chernobyl. There's a reason why they tell, it's like
Yeah.
we fight cancer with something that causes cancer. And this is why you see over and over again, you see people maybe beat cancer with chemo and radiation, traditional
Yeah.
treatments, and
Yeah.
then 5 years later, 6 years later, they die of some other types of cancer. And that's because you basically fought something with something that causes cancer. So maybe you beat one type of cancer, but your likelihood of getting other types of cancer increased drastically after chemo and radiation. So it's just, the fact that that's legal and that's not frowned down upon, or nobody looks at that like that's insanity. But this guy who has something that basically has no side effects, but yet, yeah, not everybody who was treated by Dr. Brzezinski has survived, but it's also not FDA approved. So it's considered, experimental or alternative. So you can only go to, most people who go to him are basically under deathbed and ready to
Basically
die.
written off.
Yeah. So it's but the point is that like all these perspectives should be looked at, and people should have the right to see all sides of the argument. And unfortunately, the narrative's being controlled. I know your book was banned, and then I think you re-released it, right? You got a re-release. You changed the title.
Well, we got it re-released by Red Pill Press with a changed title, and they spent about 10 months combing through everything and making sure that nothing is controversial, nothing could be said to be false. I even had to, some quotes and things that we could not trace to original source. We threw them out. I mean, without doing much damage to the book at all. But like we wanted to be super careful that nobody can say like, aha, this here is false, so your whole book is bullshit. And even after that, once Red Pill Press released the book, and it came out in I think July last year. It took them 5 weeks to ban it again. So now it's only available on Red Pill Press website, and I had the book available in like Kindle and PDF format on my website, but recently the link to my website broke. I don't know why. I kind of suspect it's some technical reason. I haven't been able to deal with it, but yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to get. But at the same time, here we are talking about this, and there's probably some people listening to it, and it's not all falling on deaf ears. And for as long as people share information and question what they're being told, they will slowly converge on the real truth, and then they will hopefully know to avoid the disasters that we had last century, where everybody went crazy, went to big world wars, and hopefully we can usher in a different kind of future for our children in the end, because if we haven't left a better world in place for our kids, then we failed.
Yeah, I mean that's why I call this podcast the Ripple Effect podcast, because I try to remind my listeners that we can all create some ripple of change, some ripple of making the world better, and even if that improvement it just seems small at first, you never know how big that ripple is or how big of an influence it can become, and we can all do something. And I was just somebody who had a full-time job, didn't really feel like I was doing something to contribute, and I started the podcast before I had kids, but now with kids I'm even more motivated to
exactly
kind of do
your reasons are stronger.
Yeah, to kind of feel like let me try to do something to to do my part in one. I mean, a little bit it's also because I think I'm sure you probably find a sense of fulfillment in kind of knowing that, hey, you're getting some truth out, you're putting attention to a topic that maybe isn't getting attention, you're doing some good in the world by getting this information out there, and I'm sure that gives you some sense of fulfillment. And I think we all, as humans, we all probably need some sense of fulfillment. We're much happier people.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Ricky, when you talk about how little we can change individually, you're right. But one thing that people, I think, don't take into account is that there's a lot of us, So if you do a very small thing, it may seem like nothing, but multiply it by 100 million or 500 million. Well, then at that point it's something. And I think that if you do something positive and meaningful, then the likelihood that another person or several people will do the same or similar according to their own conscience and priorities, it goes up. So by rejecting this idea that we're completely powerless and that may as well relax and watch TV and drink and smoke and whatever, we actually allocated some portion of our energy on a regular basis to trying to make the world a better place, even in very, very small increments. That all adds up to something that could be significant. So I think we all should. And we should all start thinking about stuff we do in terms of by multiplying it by 100 million.
Yeah, no, I try to push that idea so often, and I use this podcast as an example because I was just a person who, like I said, just had a full-time job, had, just kind of felt like I wasn't, like, what was I contributing? I felt like something was missing. Like I couldn't just focus on working and doing, the things I enjoy, like go to the gym, play basketball, play soccer, do whatever I do for enjoyment, and not feel like I'm contributing in some way. I felt like something was missing, and
Right.
and it's next thing you know, I mean, the show's kind of blown up quite a bit. I've had Jesse Ventura on, I've had Roger Stone on, I've had Rick Ross, I've had
Oh, brilliant. Wow.
yeah, so I've it's cool to have to have these people come on my show, and I'm like, who the hell am I? Who I was just a person who just was passionate about trying to share different perspectives on science and spirituality and history and anything that I found interesting that I think was worth discussing and sharing. And that's what I did. And this show has become almost a perfect example of the ripple effect that I kept trying to promote. And I think the most
Great, great, and an inspiring story, actually. Yeah.
oh, thank you. Yeah. And it is one of those things where you don't know how many people are listening, and you don't, even if you influence one person, if you get one person to for example, read your book, they read your book, and now those ideas stick with them, and now they share that with one other person, they share it with one other person, they share, and you never know how far those ideas go in changing people's perspectives. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the most dangerous thing, the most dangerous thought is not thinking you can make a difference. Those because and then you failed, you've surrendered, you've conformed, you've basically given up and given the power to somebody else. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's so dangerous, just the idea of like, ignorance is bliss. It's like, well, I can't do anything, so let me just keep going on in my life, and whoever is influencing things or controlling things, that whatever, I can't change those things anyways. It's like every great change in the world, every great movement has been started or influenced by somebody who is just willing to speak up and do something. And
Exactly.
you look at I sometimes I've said this about like some of the most influential people in history. Somebody like Martin Luther King, for example. He probably had conversations with people that influence his thought and influence his perspective and influence who he became. And those people, when they were having conversations with a young Martin Luther King, they probably didn't know Martin Luther King was going to be one of the most influential thinkers and people in American history. So they were having a conversation with somebody thinking like, okay, my thoughts, my ideas, my perspectives aren't really that important, aren't really going to change the world. But you end up influencing somebody who did end up changing the world. Somebody could be listening to this conversation,
Exactly. Yeah.
who one day could
Right.
become a politician who changes a corrupt system, or some historian who writes a influential book. So you never know who you're influencing and who you're touching. And
Right. Or it could be a soldier who doesn't pull the trigger when he's told to pull the trigger. You know.
exactly, yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. I think it was Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. It was him who he was chief of staff for Colin Powell in the White
Yes, I
House.
know. Colin Powell. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he's the one who told me the story of. I think it was him in Vietnam, where they were told to shoot down a bunch of a bunch of civilians just scattering, and he flew his helicopter in the way and told them he wasn't moving, and if they were gonna shoot them, they would have to shoot him first, and people like that, so it's like who influenced his thinking, his moral compass to do something like that. He did something that saved lives, and he had influences in his life. So it's like, this idea of positive energy and thought, it goes a long way. And
Yes. Yeah.
that's why I think long form conversations like podcasts are so important, because it gives you opportunity to really lay out ideas, have long form discussions, and kind of get an interesting perspective. I think it's too common, especially in America, and especially in the East Coast in America where I live. I live in Massachusetts, where you go to New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all of New England, it's just go, go, go. You don't have time to reevaluate your thoughts or to do some research on a topic that you're not quite sure about. People are too busy going to work, picking up their kids, doing their chores, and
Yeah.
next thing you know, they watch the news for a couple minutes while they're at the gym, or they watch the news before they go to bed, and whatever that news tells you, that becomes your truth. That becomes your perspective on reality. That becomes your perspective on
Yeah.
what's going on in
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
And so living those very fast-paced lives where you're not really sitting down and sharing ideas, and even the idea that people shouldn't talk about politics or religion or any of this stuff. I mean, that stuff, it bothers me a little bit because I'm like, we can't talk about the important things. We can't talk about the important topics. To me, it's much more important to be able to have discussions with people that you would disagree with, because that's where you learn. Like, why do we disagree? What's your perspective? What's your
Yeah.
opinion?
Yeah.
And you know, to only talk to people you agree with, to me, is very boring. You know, I want to. I'm not sure I'm correct on every opinion I have. I want to hear other people's opinions and perspectives. So I think
Sure.
we should be having these long form discussions about all types of topics and historical events and all this stuff, and really learn from one another. You know, so.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't have a podcast without one long rant. I always find a way to go on a long rant.
Oh no, that's good. That's good. That's good stuff, Rick. I'm completely I'm completely in agreement with you. And um another bit of proof that what we think and what we do individually matters hugely is that they even bother to lie to us. You know, if it didn't matter, they wouldn't need to lie to us, right? They would just tell us, hey, you know, get your shit together. You're going to war. Why? Because this country has oil. Oh, okay. But it can't be done that way. They have to tell us fairy tales about freedom and democracy and about how the leader of their country is really nasty, and we have to make the world a better place. And then if they convince you that that's why you're going to war, then you go because you want to make the world a better place, right? So all our individual actions do matter very much. And you know, another incidentally, having since we talked about the American Civil War, one of the reasons why the British were very, very reticent about actually just attacking the United States militarily, because they had those plans as well, is because the United States was so popular that they were afraid that their troops would massively defect to the American side. Okay? This was a big complication that they had.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
So you see.
yeah, I'd never heard that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, like none of these things are actually secrets. They're not even controversial. They're not part of the mainstream curriculum. So to find them out, you have to go and read these historians who actually took the pain of verifying things and researching in the original, you know, diplomatic correspondence and the old sources to find out all these things. But they're out there, you know, they're out there, and all people have to do is kind of keep their eyes open and keep their ears clean, and question why we're being told what we're being told, and understanding that there's a rhyme and reason for everything, and that if you go along with everything that you're being fed, then you're being led to slaughter.
Absolutely. I think that's the most important thing, is just question everything, even narratives that you know that you
Even
already.
narratives that you like,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, even, you know, for example, there's a great documentary called Hellstorm about the German perspective of World War II. And it's like,
Right?
wait, who the hell would want to watch a documentary about the German perspective of World War II? You know, and it's, you know, it goes into how many people were raped and killed by the Allies. You know,
Right.
majority, mostly the Russians, you know, and the Soviets, and it's, you know, it's a sad story, but you know, that perspective should be told too, because not everybody in Germany was for everything that Hitler did, and there's a lot of innocent people who lived in towns and small villages and stuff that were just basically, you know, the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, and really
Well,
didn't.
yeah, and they were also, you know, they were also being fed bullshit on an industrial scale again to make them willing to go to war when it was absolutely never in anybody's interest apart from political and corporate and financial elites to go to war. It's like it's never in the interest of the common man to go to war. Like imagine your children if you had to go to war, you can't contribute to your family, you can't spend time with your kids, and maybe you never come back to them. Why would you go? It would have to be something really, really important for you to do that. And so obviously you wouldn't unless you're being lied and manipulated into it.
Yeah, well, I think that's what you said was so important. The idea that you're highlighting the fact that they lied to us because for the most part there's people in the world are good, and we understand we do have probably more in common than we have differences. So the only way to get people to pull that trigger to kill somebody else for no reason is to give them some bullshit reason. You lie because if you told them the truth, they wouldn't do it. And
they wouldn't do it, exactly.
Yeah. So there's a great episode of Black Mirror where they had these spoiler alert for people listening. They had this software they were giving the military. It's been a while since I watched it, so I don't remember the specifics, but I remember the idea. They had like I don't know if they were giving the military soldiers food or they did something, implanted this thing in their head where they were seeing the enemy as like these monsters, so every time they saw these enemies, they saw like these scary monsters looking things, and it was super easy to pull the trigger and to hate them and dehumanize them because they didn't, you just created this, and you see old posters, propaganda posters and commercials where they do the same, the US has done the same thing with like making the Germans look evil or or whatnot. And it's if you really pull back that bullshit, you realize like, oh, there's people there who have families and kids, and they go and they kick a soccer ball around with their friends just like we do. They have a drink and eat and laugh together and tell jokes the way we do. That all these people are, in all these countries, we're all very similar. I've been very lucky where growing up, being a foreigner in America, I've attracted a lot of other foreigners, and I'll meet other foreigners and we become friends. And I have friends from Estonia, I have friends from El Salvador, from Lebanon, from Poland, and from all over the world. And we all get along and we all hang out. And, my groups of friends, my closest friends are a big melting pot of people from all different continents. And we all eat, we like to laugh, we joke. We have a lot of differences, but we have a lot of things alike. But the things that are different don't make us, doesn't separate us. It only makes us more intriguing to one another. And so, I think that's so important. Every culture has beautiful things about it. And instead of looking at other people from other countries as like, oh, they're not like us, so they're weird or they're different, or the way we live is the right way of living and the correct way of living. Like, we should embrace other cultures and other, because the thing is, they're looking at your culture the same way. Like somebody from another country is looking at our culture like, well, who are you to say that's what you should be eating or not eating? Who are you to say that that's the way you should be dressed or not dressed? It's it's all perspective. So I think it's always super cool to meet people from other countries and be able to kind of embrace the differences and really, and
not feel like you have to kill them, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But I thank you so much, Alex. I can't thank you enough for your time. I probably took up a lot of you.
It was my pleasure, Ricky, and I want to also say hello to your listeners, because obviously they're listening to good quality stuff if they follow you. So that's all wonderful. I'm encouraged when I have experiences like this.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think podcasts are one of the few places that still you can find like just real discussions and real perspectives, and for the time being, they seem a little less censored than other places where you're getting discussions and media and news and whatnot. So the nice thing about this, I don't have any sponsorships. I put my podcast also on YouTube, but I don't take any money on YouTube so I don't have to worry about being demonetized because I never monetized it in the first place. I want to be able to have the freedom to kind of put out what I want and to talk about, let people talk about whatever they want to talk about and have these open discussions. So to me, that's, much more important than trying to make a extra buck here or there, which makes it harder for my wife to be like, why do you still do the podcast? You're spending money on bandwidth and storage and all this stuff. And, don't you want to find a way of making money? I'm like, yeah, but once all the ways that I've found of making money, having sponsorships, having, monetize on YouTube or whatnot, it gets in the way of what I'm trying to do, and that's try to spread this as much as I can, as fast as I can, and as easy as I can to people. So this way, I have a full-time job, so it's that's my primary income, and this is just a passion project. I can just focus on.
Oh, great, cheers, yeah.
So, but thanks again, Alex. Hey, I'll definitely have to have you on again in the future. I feel like we could talk for hours, and I love you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
So brilliant, Rick. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm very glad we managed to connect in spite of the 6-hour time difference, and yes. I look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely, and let people know where they can get the book. You said Red Pill published.
Oh, right. At the moment, the book is available at the site called Red Pill Press, and the title is Grand Deception: Truth About Bill Browder, the Magnitsky Act, and Anti-Russian Sanctions. It's long, but basically Grand Deception will lead you there. Mm-hmm. And I think if you do a little bit of digging, you might find somewhere a free PDF. I'm pretty sure that they're available somewhere online.
Awesome. Yeah, and you're on Fault Lines from time to time. That's another
I'm on Fault Lines from time to time. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard you on there. You're on Twitter. You're on Facebook. Definitely check out Alex's work. And thank you so much for taking the time for talking to me and taking the time to write a book, because I know that's not easy either.
That's not easy. But hey, it's if you have something bobbing in your head, it's the greatest gift you can give to yourself. It really is. So, you make a pact with yourself to work a little bit every day, and as time passes, you realize, hey, it's shaping up into something.
Yeah, and like I tell people, like, music, books, even podcasts. These are things that hopefully will outlive us. They'll be on the internet. Once they're on the internet, hopefully they're there forever. And so putting in the time and effort to have these discussions, or to write a book, or put together a documentary and throwing it on.
Wow.
Hopefully it's beneficial. It stays there, and it helps spread these ideas and stories for even a long time after we're not here anymore. So
exactly.
Well, hey, enjoy the rest of your. I think
pleasure. Thank you again for having me, and take care of yourself and your family. And I look forward to the next time, Ricky.
Great, Alex. Take care. Enjoy your Sunday.
Brilliant. Take care. Yeah. Bye. Bye.